Hello everyone, Jim Maxwell from ABC Sport here, and I'm thrilled to be with you to kick off this new cricket cassette, Wicket to Wicket, from This Sporting Life's rampaging Roy Slaven and H.G. Nelson. I first met Roy and H.G. outside the SCG members stand on a warm spring day early in the cricket season of 1974. They'd put a submission to the Australian Cricket Board in an effort to get the 20 ball over into the game. And even though the innovation was never taken up by the board, I've been impressed with their thinking about the caper ever since. And so when they asked me to introduce this cassette, it was a dream come true. On Wicket to Wicket, you get the breadth of their uncompromising views on the greatest game of all. These two have played a lot of big matches, seen a lot of cricket, spoken to all the greats, and gathered ideas from around the world for this monumental work, which is the culmination of their lifetime of interest in the game. On this one cassette, Roy and HG discuss all the big issues. Sheffield Shield, what is wrong with it? Nudity in cricket, can it work? Television, is it ruining the game? What makes a good captain? And personalities, who are they? But enough of me, let's roll the arm over. Here we go with Roy taking the new ball to open the attack from the cathedral end and putting in a real quick one on the LBW issue.
Well, this is hello H.G. Nelson and hello listeners. Obviously the LBW rule has been crying out for changes ever since the days of Dr. W.G. Grace. He, of course, was a master of being able to avoid LBW because the law was a little bit different in those days too, I must concede. However, the LBW rule as being exploited by players of the ilk of, say, Alderman and Richard Hadley have, I think, brought the game into enormous disrepute. And I've spoken with many, many umpires over the years, the great Col Egar, for example, and I spent a lot of time with Colin very, very recently. We had a very light luncheon about 3 days ago, and it was a lovely affair. And Col said to me point blank that if he was umpiring these days, that there would be no LBWs given out. And I agree with him, HG. It's too easy these days for bowlers just to put the pill short of a good length in front of the stumps and expect the batsman to miss the pill. I feel, and I've spent many, many discussions with the Australian Cricket Board over this, I feel if we removed pads from the game, all manner of padding, that is the pads the players wear around their legs, the padding they wear around their groin region, their heads, that is helmets, the gloves, if you removed all those things and took the game back to the beautiful basics it began with, then I think we'd see the LBW rule either A, eliminated, or B, we'd get the very attractive and beautiful side of a player really toughing it out. And by that I mean, if a player has the courage of his convictions and is prepared to stand in front of the stumps and just get belted ball in, ball out from the knee down, then I'm prepared to say the bloke has done very, very well. Apart from that, I think the instincts of the players would be to move away so that their legs and ankles don't get hit by the ball, and they have to start using the bat. If they miss the pill, the stumps get hit, LBW suddenly, hello, becomes totally irrelevant.
And when you look at some of these great digs of yesteryear, where there's, of course, a great batter up one end and a not-so-good batter up the other, a rabbit with a bat who's probably just out there holding up an end, wouldn't the courage of some of those fast bowlers, Terry Alderman comes to mind, even the great dobber, Peter Taylor of the modern era, you look back at Jeff Thompson, Dennis Lilly, standing there, being reduced to blood, guts and gristle as they wore it. Over after over, sure they might be in about 11:05 in the morning.
Yes.
They're the last two there.
So they had to stall for the whole day.
Just wearing it hour after hour, being propped up on the bat in the end because, of course, the legs had given away, but still dangling the bit of gristle that remains between the bowler and the stumps and denying the bowler that final wicket to get the of course the Ashes back or something like that, the heroics. Then we'd remember them. We wouldn't remember people like Rick McCosker coming on with a busted jaw. We'd remember people like Terry Alderman walking off with the knees blown completely away, the hips just a rotten stump sticking into the ground, and the rest of the team dragging him off to the water barrier.
Or being carried off by the St John's ambulance people, HG, towards the end of the day.
With the grandstand there erupting. At the end. MCG is yet another test you saved. That'd be cricket, Roy.
Look, I agree with you, HG, and I think it would get kiddies into the game too, because it would make the game a lot fairer. Look, I've never encouraged kiddies to be pillows or to be Nancy's and to wear protective clobber. I think it undermines and undervalues skill. I'm an old-fashioned bloke, HG. I like skill. I like a bloke putting willow on leather. And if he or she can't do that, get out of the bloody game. However, on the other hand, there's always something to be said for the romance of courage. And if we could just see a little bit of that, a little bit of Terry Alderman just standing there being hit ball after ball, I think it'd be beautiful. I think you get the crowds back, and more importantly, I think the Sheffield Shield as a competition would just go through the roof.
Well, because basically what's held the Shield back, Roy, is the fact that...
Padding?
Indeed, I've said this time and time again. If you had a nude competition for the Shield, then you'd have no doubt the crowds would be down there queuing up. I mean, you know, we're talking on as it unfolds, this magnificent Shield battle with Queensland struggling year in, year out to lose, or to win, should I say, and offering, only a loss as a result for their poor supporters up there in Brisbane. Now, what I find amazing is if it was a nude Shield competition that removed the LBW rule, then we'd have two of the greatest things to revolutionise the game. People talk about the Packer revolution, but that was only a joke. That was a hastily cobbled together the sham in comparison with what we're talking about. A nude Shield comp. Roy, could it work?
HG, of course it could work. Because the thing is that people often forget, and I'm reminded when I meet with players in dressing rooms after matches, when the champagne's being spilled down the pants, etc., and a couple of blokes are hopping into the bath there, and it's a wonderful sight. People often forget just what an attractive jib that is cut by a fit cricketer. I've seen many of the great players nude. Les Favell was cut a beautiful figure nude.
Mike
Gadding did. The great Bob Massey cut a very attractive figure.
Fat Cat Ritchie in the old days. Gus Gilmore. The memories keep coming back.
Yeah, even Richie Benno, HG. Even Brian Tabor. Marvellous figures of humankind, and I know for a fact that a lot of these blokes were prepared to be seen nude, and often would, I've been to restaurants, let's face it, with the blokes when there's been a bit of hijinks and japes going on, and they've ended up, nude, sitting around the table there having their dinner in a restaurant, and you would expect the maitre d' of those particular restaurants to take umbrage and to order them to leave. Not at all. Because what they would find is that people would stream into these restaurants, sit down, want to eat, just to be near a couple of cricketers who were sitting there in the nude eating. And if they're prepared to watch them doing something ordinary like that, imagine what the general public would do to see them doing what they do best. That is, standing around out in the middle, au natural. Can you see it, HG, on, say, one of the most attractive ovals in the world, say the Adelaide Oval, a lovely sunny afternoon, you've turned up, you've got your esky, you're standing around there near the Victor Richardson gates, and suddenly out into the middle walk 14 nudists, or 13 as it turns out, 2 with a bit of willow and the other with a ball, or one of the others with a ball. I think it'll be beautiful to see. I would love to see a slips cordon there with the wicket keeper with only gloves on, nothing else, and I think it'd be terrific, and it'd be so telegenic, and gee, as you said, talk about Packer revolutions, this would be a televisual feast, and it would get people queuing up to be there live so that young kiddies could reach out over the pickets just to have a bit of a toggle on a bloke's wedding tackle as he went past, and it would add a new dimension, I think, to, say, Merv aerobics, and a new dimension to getting autographs by kiddies. I think it'd be beautiful.
AB used to paint with Dulux. Then he tried Berger Breeze. Finally, in desperation, he dipped the brush into Taubman's, but he still couldn't get the true-to-life colours he was looking for. Lloyd Rees couldn't help. Ken Doane was far too gaudy. Even Kerry O'Keefe was stumped. AB was just about to leave the fibro grey when he tried Angus Fraser Paints, the paint to make your house a picture.
December the 8th, 1974 was Ray Bright's first game for Australia. How did he fit in so well? Ray, like all great Australian team members, had a first game and realised that behaviour during the drinks break guaranteed his selection for the next 10 years, even though he rarely took a wicket, scored even fewer runs, and had to be hidden in the field at deep third man. At that first and telling drinks break, Ray looked the part, grabbing the ball jauntily after the over, tossing it to the umpire, taking the third glass of squash from the front of the tray, standing beside Dougie Walters and Tangles Walker. He placed one hand on his hip and nodded knowingly at whatever was said. The selectors were delighted, and Ray was a hit. You too will have a first game one day. Prepare for that moment now by seeing the big match specialists H.G. Nelson and rampaging Roy Slaven. Don't let anyone say as the trolley approaches after the first hour ticks by, "Who's the new boy, Sonny Jim?"
Roy, just finishing up on the Sheffield Shield, what do you think it caused it to fall into disrepute as it has over the recent, 50 years? Because people remember that great stoush always, used to be on Boxing Day at the MCG between New South Wales and Victoria as being the highlight of the card, and now that'd draw probably 50 people for the whole go-round. But what has caused it to drift away? Is it just because we see so much first-class cricket with people like Bisham Beatty, Kapil coming out here week in, week out throughout the summer?
I agree with you, actually. I think you've hit the nail absolutely on the head, as usual. I can remember, for example, days when nothing would give me greater satisfaction than to just stroll down to Lithgow, just down, say, to the tennis courts, the local tennis courts, to see the A grade or the B grade finals between players of no note, but who were just good craftspeople, good genuine blokes who could hit a ball pretty hard and control it reasonably well. Then after a while, we found that on television we could see some of the best players in the world. A couple of names come to mind, say the great Roy Emerson. You could see fiery Fred Stolle, for example, doing his work. And once you'd seen these absolute great technicians and masters of the game doing their work, you weren't so inclined to stroll down and have a look at your local blokes going around of a Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon playing their tennis. I think the same things happen with the cricket. I used to love going and watching the B grade and the A grade players at Lithgow as a kiddie. And then when I was playing myself, of course, I realised no one was coming to watch us play because anyone who was interested in the game was playing it themselves. And then after a while, you could start watching it on television and see the great Bill Lawry in action, the great Keith Stackpole taking John Snow apart. And after a while, you thought, well, I'd much rather watch this than watching the ordinary blokes just rolling the arm over, trundling in, over after afternoon, became terribly boring. And then watching first-class cricket became boring. And then you wanted to see the very best of the very best playing. And after a while, that became boring. I think the Sheffield Shield HG is without doubt the most fiercely contested competition of any cricket anywhere in the world. I think it is by far and away the toughest competition in the world, and I think everyone will acknowledge that. But because we've been spoilt by watching absolute masters of the game, as you mentioned, Asif Masood, Bisham Beatty, Sarfraz Nawaz. And once you've seen people of that calibre who are just absolutely beyond peer, then it's very, very hard to get interested in Joe Scuderi. It's very hard to get interested in Jamie Siddons. It's very hard to get interested in Peter Gladiogow or Phil Marks. Very hard. Great players, sure, but they just seem very, very ordinary when you've seen the very, very best. And like you, I would like to see Test cricket taken away from television. And as soon as it is, that's when you're going to see the kiddies queuing up to have a bit of a look at their heroes as they would become, the Gladiogows, the Siddons, and the Markses of the world.
I know, Roy, you've been on record as saying television is one of the greatest blights on the modern game, and that in fact you've advanced the position that there should be no television, no radio, no newspaper reportage of a match until after the final wicket has been taken, until after stumps have been drawn on the final day. Now, Roy, a lot of people find this an extreme approach, but you, I understand, fundamentally believe that this would actually get people back watching the game.
I'm sure it would, actually. Unlike many, I can remember the day the Don scored his 100th run for the 100th time in first-class competition. It was at the SCG. How did I know? I didn't hear it via television. I didn't hear it via radio. I was walking down Anzac Parade and I heard enormous screams. It was like an earthquake. At first I thought, hello, what's happening here? Roy's going to go. He's going to leave the planet. But it wasn't to be. This rumble, this subsonic sort of fervour that was coming through my feet via my loins through to my brain, these screams and yells I could hear from 20-odd or 60-odd, as it turned out, 1,000 people at the SCG, all chanting as one. telegraphed to me, a la Jungle Drum style, that the Don had done it. At least I assumed the Don had done it, and that was the mystery, HG. There was mystery. You didn't quite know what was happening, who was winning, who wasn't, or even who was playing. You found out later, and you thought to yourself, bloody hell, I could have been there. I could have seen it with 60,000 other people. And the reason you felt that is because you weren't there and because you didn't know. There was an air of mystery. I think that mystery's got to come back to cricket, HG. I think in the same way spinners have died ever since the mystery spinner Johnny Gleeson stopped lacing up a boot. For that very reason, I think we've got to bring back the mystery, take away the facts and get the people back to the ground saying, I want to know what's happening. I want to know who's playing today. I want to know if Kapil Dev is still playing. I want to know if Peter Clattergow is still playing. I want to know if Stumpy Boone has still got a moustache. And the only way you know is by actually bloody well paying your money and going through the turnstiles and turning up and having a bit of a look.
Even with the beard, Greg Chappell always looked spick and span. How? The answer was in the wash. Greg's mum used Lord Ted Dexter, the powder with punch to knock out grass marks, ball stains and unsightly pad rub. Lord Ted Dexter, the powder that selects you as skipper.
HG and Roy have developed a bat with an inbuilt theodolite. Never again will you have to rely on dubious foreign umpires when taking guard. With the Nelson Slaven spruce bat, surveyor weighted to perfection at 2.6 pounds, you'll stroll to the crease with confidence at Hyderabad, Karachi, Lahore, Calcutta, Port of Spain and Lords, and shock the cricket establishment by screaming, "It's okay, umpy, I'm ready."
How would you like to be stout? Stumpy Boone wasn't born that way, so talk to him. Just ask Roy to tee it up.
And what can we do, Roy, if we declare television, LBW, the lack of nudism in the modern game as blights on the game? What can we do about overrates? Because let's face it, around the world, every year, week in, week out, while the season's on, while the two teams here, the Ashes, Pakistanis, Kiwis, West Indies, whoever it is, there's bleating from the box. On and on it goes about no matter who's in there, whether it was Les Flavel in the old days, or whether it was Norm O'Neill today, or the great Neville Oliver himself, just on and on and on they go about overrates. Now, what can we do, Roy? Is finding the answer?
Look, I agree with everything you've said, HG, and I spent a bit of time with Slug Jordan recently talking about this very thing, and he said to me, Roy, once the talk turns to overrate, you can safely assume the game has lost any interest for anyone whatsoever, and I agree with him totally. I think we've got... where the overrate starts to be a problem these days is because the overs are too short, and you get that transition period where the players have got to crossover, say from slips at one end to slips at the other, and fine leg has got to become deep third man, etc., etc. That's your problem, I think. And I think when the World Cricket Authorities decided to have the 6-ball over in favour of the 8-ball over, that's when all the talk about overrates started to creep in. I think they pulled the wrong rein. I think, as I'm pretty sure you do, and I know the listeners do, HG, we should get back to not only the 8-ball over, but get up to a 20-ball over. That's the solution, so that you would get fewer changeovers, turnovers, and I think not the over rate would increase, but the ball rate would. And I think it's the ball rate people should be looking at, not over rates.
How about another suggestion, Roy? Once the field is set, they can't move until the end of the over. It's a revolutionary idea, sure. You've got a right-hander or a left-hander out there. I understand the problems. But once you've set that slips cordon, 4 in the slips there, the gully and that, you leave it there, no matter who's facing.
You're absolutely right, actually, and it would have the benefit of forcing the bowler to bowl to his field. And how long has it been since we've seen that skill?
I can't recall it in my lifetime, Roy.
No.
I've only read about it in Wisden.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think Garth McKenzie was the last bowler, the last Australian bowler, and I think Asif Masood might have been the last subcontinental bowler, who could actually bowl to a field. It didn't matter where. I mean, I did experiments with this with the great Asif Masood. I remember just at training, I put a bloke in to have a bit of a bat. I've forgotten who it was, but I'm sure it'll come to me. It might have been Trevor Chappell, and gee, Trevor could hit a ball in his day. I put Trevor in, and I put all the fieldsmen, 14 of them, because it was, just a training run, I put them all out at the point fence on the boundary. Stood them there all side by side, military fashion. I said to Asif Masood, bowl to your field. HG, he did. And every time, the only place that a person with the skill of Trevor Chappell could put the ball was to the point boundary. where it was picked up every time. HG, it's a skill that's been crying out to be brought back, and I agree with you. Keep the fieldsmen fixed in their one spots. Doesn't matter left-hander or right-hander, you'd get the bowlers learning to bowl to a field again.
The only exception to this, Roy, I reckon, which is permissible, is I can remember seeing the great Imran Khan in a one-day fixture, the Lion of Lahore, the pride of Pakistan, taking the ball in the final over in a one-day fixture, Australia v Pakistan. He probably had to get 3 or 4 wickets. Big Soddy O'Donnell was out there clocking the ball to all parts of the field. And I remember Imran took about 40 minutes to bowl that over. And I was on my feet with every moment of every delivery. Admittedly, it was a 6-ball over. But he came in, of course, and then thought about it, readjusted the field. He didn't know what he was doing. He was moving players around. Soddy O'Donnell didn't know where he was going. And then Soddy got out on the first ball LBW because, of course...
So it worked.
Indeed. Then, of course, the next batter came in, might have been Ian Healy came in, and Ian, of course, went first ball as well after about 20 minutes.
Surprise.
Then Terry Alderman came out and surprised everybody by lasting a delivery, which was the one that lured him in and give him the false sense of security. This was about 20 minutes later. And then, of course, after the Lion of Lahore, Imran Khan moved the field around again. He bowled him and bowled him, knocked out the middle peg.
Sure.
And out came Merv Hughes, looking pretty cocky. He only had to get a couple of runs and he was going to be the champion of Australia. And, of course, he was knocked over pretty well as well because the nervousness that he put the batters under was just excruciating. You saw the yellow tide rising around their feet, drifting onto the pitch. It probably covering up where the wicket-keeper was there and over to point itself. You saw the teeth chattering from the commentary position. You saw the helmet fall off because the head was wobbling around so much it couldn't stay on. But that was cricket, Roy. And that is the only time it's permissible. Maybe the last over of every game, you can have as much time as you like to bowl it.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's room for the long over, or the quality over, as I would call it. And maybe each bowler has got to be, there has to be a method of calibrating whether they are quality over bowlers or not. And if you had, say, dull over bowlers who have to get through pretty quickly, say Peter Taylor could never bowl a quality over. The Lion of Lahore could. So the Lion of Lahore might be allowed, say, an allowance of 25 minutes per over in his instance. Peter Taylor, on the other hand, or Terry Alderman, they're allowed 3 minutes, and they're penalised if they take longer than that. Maybe there's got to be that sort of thinking, that sort of lateral thinking applied to cricket to make it survive, HG. You're absolutely right, because sometimes a 40 to 45 minute over can just be the most exciting thing in cricket.
I'm just wondering if really we're getting through to the players that the public matter enough when they're thinking about bowling and setting field placements. Whether the public who come and pay, let's face it, there's a recession on, it's going to get worse between now and the next century, and the dollars just won't be there at the turnstiles to support cricket. However, if there was attempts to made, say if there was a slow over rate, that we strung up a couple of players as a bit of icing on the day down at the, say, the Adelaide Oval, the picturesque ground, we could string up players from the Victor Richardson gates and then get all the rubbish that have been brought in by the people, soft drink cans and, ice cream cone wrappings and all that sort of stuff, put it underneath the players and light it up and burn them as well.
Yes, draconian certainly, HG. I saw the opportunity there for maybe having more fun. Say, for example, during the luncheon interval, say if the Lion of Pakistan or Peter Taylor, for example, had been letting the side down by bowling his over, say in the latter case, in 3 minutes 2 seconds, i.e. 2 seconds too long, then maybe Peter Taylor would be asked to just stand amongst the crowd, nude, and people could do with him what they will, either throw things at him or, give him a dead leg or a horse bite or something like that. Just fiddle about with him a bit for 40 minutes, just to their own enjoyment. I think that could add something to it. And the thing is about it, HG, is that the players themselves would love it.
Thinking of your future? Then think of a time when there is no future. Think about being buried at the SCG. Think about being planted 6 feet under at the Wacker. Think about being laid to rest under the turf in a cricket kit at the prettiest oval in the world. You won't live forever, and decisions taken today can make for a beautiful tomorrow. Just imagine, for a minimal investment now, you could get one jagging back unpredictably from outside the off stump on the first morning of a test. And as the opener walks, have your kiddies camped in front of the Victor Richardson gates murmur, "Hey, I think Dad and Mum got Gucci out."
Hello everyone, Sir Richard Hadley here. Since I've shut up shop, a lot of people have been quizzing me about all sorts of things. Well, the only things I'm prepared to talk about are cricket and paint.
On cricket, most people know that I'm a world champion, but when it comes to paint, there's only one solution. Angus Fraser paints.
The players are taking drinks again. You find yourself on the tooth. You open up the mobile fridge, nothing. Even the bread and sliced ham with a smidgen of AB's brown looks boring. It's getting desperate. It's times like these that you think, muffin. Col Egar's muffins. Out now in banana, plum and mint. Col Egar's, the muffin for the man in the middle, or the muffin for the middle in the man.
Well, I know, Roy, we've spoken at many times. We've spoken at many functions, many pie nights, many smoke socials, many cricket club dues, many awards nights about the quality of umpiring. We're both devastated at the moment about the standard of world umpiring. We don't understand why the International Cricket Board, the control board, hasn't bitten the bullet and got a panel of Pakistani umpires to do all tests. But, Roy, the umpiring at the world at the moment is the lowest ebb that you and me have seen in our lives. We don't know what we can do about it, but surely, Roy, we've got to start somewhere, and where would you suggest we boot off?
HG, I think you've got to start with the kiddies. I can remember years ago when I'd go to, say, a primary school just to give a clinical workshop on cricket. And I would say to kiddies, how many of you would like to be umpires? And normally there'd be a ratio of, say, 20 or 30% of those interested in cricket who would just love to be umpires, basically, and dreamed of one day being able to umpire a Sheffield Shield game, and weren't game to dream that one day they might be able to do a test match. These days, HG, you might only find 3 or 4 kiddies out of a group of 100. That is 3% of kiddies who are interested in being umpires. I think that's parlous. I think that's absolutely, totally unacceptable. And I think the Cricket Board has got to do something about it. Now, I've asked Dickie Bird, the great English umpire, of course, to come to Australia to speak in primary schools. He's refused. I've spoken with Col Egar to do a few workshops teaching kids how to put their fingers up, how to stand at attention, or stand at ease, as it turns out, for, say, 8 hours at a stretch. And most importantly, how to pass the pebble from one hand to the other as the bowler passes you with your counting. I'm dead against counters in the game, actually. I think that's encouraged the slovenliness and the laziness that's crept into umpiring as we've seen it over the last 15 years. Give me a bloke, and I know there are very few umpires who still do this, who before the test match will just wander around the car park and pick up 6 pebbles, put them in the pocket, and you've got to choose your pebbles carefully, because you know you've got to fiddle with them for a long time. So they've got to be acceptable and feel good. Take them with you out there, put them in your pocket, fiddle with them, take them out, start practising. Don't think you're going to be able to get out into the middle there and just pass the pebble in the correct manner without a bit of practice. And I know Col Egar, for example, used to pass the pebble to himself before a game for upwards of an hour and a half, just standing there, maybe in his dressing room, just standing to attention, passing the pebble, imagining a bowler going past him. Because it's that sort of concentration you need, HG. It's the concentration that's disappeared. It's the laziness. It's the inability for the current umpires to be able to do 2 things or 3 things at once. A, pass the pebble. B, look at the popping crease. And C, see where the pill has lodged on the pitch. I don't think any of them can do it anymore. I think it's a forgotten skill. And I think the Australian Cricket Board has got to get out to the PE teachers in all schools and get them teaching these very essential and basic skills, because if we don't have good umpires, we can't have good cricket. If we don't have good cricket, we're not going to have crowds. If we don't have crowds, cricket is dead.
I agree with you entirely, Roy. I think that the counter has taken a lot of the magic out of the game.
It has.
I think that the...
and it's inaccurate.
Indeed. You can often be wide of the mark. And the other thing I like about the great umpires of yesteryear, Shunuk Ranur, the great Pakistani umpire, and of course Steve Randall of the modern era, is they can pass pebbles without anybody noticing the fact that they can pass them.
They're maestros, they're magicians. And I, for one, love, and I know the public love it. How many times have you and I been to, say, Manuka Oval, been to the Gabba, been to the Wacker, been to the SCG, been to the South Australian Oval, the prettiest oval in the world? How often have you and I been walking out through the turnstiles, going home, and have overheard people saying, Steve Randall's work this afternoon, beautiful work, didn't see him pass the pebble once, and they were looking for it. I think that's beautiful to observe, HG, and while the mystery is still there as to how they do it and still manage to concentrate, but that's the thing, the passing of the pebble has got to become so second nature that you can do those other things you referred to and I referred to, looking where the instep's hitting the popping crease, looking to see where the ball is going to bounce. But this current crop of young upstarts coming into the umpiring caper who can't pass a pebble, who have to look at their calibrator all the time, who can't concentrate for more than a couple of hours, I think they should be just run out of the game, or like before, when we're talking about players who have to be disciplined, I think umpires should be, if they do something wrong, if there's an LBW decision that is blatantly wrong, as happened in the instance of Dean Jones in the one-off Trans-Tasman test against New Zealand recently, that umpire should have been, of course, clothes taken off him at the luncheon break or the tea break, totally nude, blindfolded, and just left to run around or move around, bump around amongst the crowd, and they do what they like with him, as before, the Chinese burn, the horse bite, the boot up the date, all those sorts of things, just to make sure that in future he keeps his bloody mind on the job and passes the pebble properly.
And just, Roy, one final thing on the umpiring is that if it's good enough to have the fastest bowler in the world competition, Jeff Thompson, Richard Hadley, all those sort of people surely to goodness television can find time to put on a pebble passing display by the umpires, and people sit at home and work out who's passing when and how.
Actually, look, I know a lot of people will laugh about this sort of thing, but it's a skill. It's not a skill. I'm sorry, correction. It's a trade.
An art, Roy, dare I say.
All right, an art. And I think the more if television can concentrate on the skills of the trade, on the artistry, those beautiful little things that make the game larger than the sum of its individual parts, that's where television can help the game.
Sarich reveals how he died 4 years ago. Fat Cat Richie says, my only regret was being born. All this and Don Lane on saving the Serengeti, Fergie's moon photos, and in our home hints lift out, knit Roy Higgins' lucky sock. Jeff Thompson says, in the kitchen, I wear the pants, and the world population explosion, how tennis can win, plus all this month's TV. That's Roy Magazine, out now with Jeff Kennett in feathers on the cover.
That's where television can help the game.
This month in Roy Magazine, Jim Schwartzman admits he is colourblind. Ralph Sarich reveals how he died 4 years ago. Fat Cat Richie says, my only regret was being born. All this and Don Lane on saving the Serengeti, Fergie's moon photos, and in our home hints lift out, knit Roy Higgins' lucky sock. Jeff Thompson says, in the kitchen, I wear the pants, and the world population explosion, how tennis can win, plus all this month's TV. That's Roy Magazine, out now with Jeff Kennett in feathers on the cover.
Well, Roy, one of the other things that I think has gone for a very big burden in the modern game, and certainly I think it's a lack of inclusion in the canon of cricket, is spin. It's taken an enormous decline during my lifetime, especially over the last 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Now, you have to go back to the highlights of spin in the last, 20 years, and the two highlights that I'm prepared to name as the great days when spin stood up and was counted as part of cricket was the day Lance Gibbs held up his three fingers when he got the hat-trick in the Queensland Test, and you saw the spinning finger that was really a gnarled stub of flesh and gristle that Lance had prepared basically by himself with a hammer and a pair of Stilsons, holding the finger in the Stilsons, just building it with a hammer until he got that stub that could tweak and talk. The other day, of course, was the day that Johnny Gleeson, the mystery spinner, appeared on the Don Lane show and revealed the mysteries of the craft to a nation breathless at how he managed to do it. But Roy, why has spin taken such a phenomenal pasting over the last, say, 50 years?
I think there's been very little encouragement, HG, given to kiddies in schools to get on board the spinning train. You know, it's all pace, 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 and more pace these days. And if you look at the idols, say, from the 60s and even in the 50s right through to today, those that, you know, score the big ads on television, those that, you know, are encouraged to get their own television programs, those that are seen as the shock troopers, the storm troopers, the big men of the caper are always the quick bowlers. And I think this has sold two generations of Australian cricketers. The dump sold them a pup.
Because I would have loved to have seen, say in the old days, Ashley Mallett.
Yeah.
Johnny Gleeson.
Peter Philpott.
Indeed. Given their own ads, say Coke ads.
Well, Philpott was. He did Gillette Super Blue Blades on one occasion, and they were terrific ads. Because people were refreshed by seeing a spinner talking, because they knew a spinner's mind a spinner's mind moves crab-like. It's a very complex organ. A spinner's mind, and I think they're national living treasures. Any spinners you see around, you look at that bloke and you think that bloke has got a mind. And you can sense, even these days, when the ball, as it is occasionally, when it gets thrown to a spinner, you can see the gasps of relief and anticipation in crowds throughout the world. And they think, oh, beaut, Viv's going to roll his arm over. Or Eddie Hemmings has flung the ball, and you think, oh, here comes some fireworks, because you're going to see a real battle. And sure, it can pay off either way. I often encouraged, when I was captaining, I'd often encourage spinners to buy wickets. So you think to yourself, well, listen, we got 300 runs up. I might put a spinner on and say, get rid of this bloke for 150 or 180. So you'd buy his wicket, because eventually you get bored just clubbing the bejesus out of the ball, and, players would get tired of trying to find it in the blackberry patches. But you would buy the wicket. Eventually it would work for you, especially on a very hot day on a turning wicket. But I agree with you. And I was discussing this with Tiger O'Reilly recently. I said, Tig, what's happened with Grill, what's gone wrong? And of course he rabbited on, and 4 days later I told him to shut up, because he was just talking spinners, and lamenting the fact that they disappeared. But I still think they're out there. Occasionally when I go around to schools, I'm given, enormous course to go around to schools these days. And often I go around, and just past the cricket nets there, and I'll see a kid, a potential tweaker. I'll just see the wrist looping, and I'll see, and I'll offer that kid a bit of encouragement, even though the rest of the, kids say, you're a dork, you're a fool, bowl it quickly. I'll get the kiddie aside and I'll say, listen, you've got something there. You've got a real gift. You've got a trade waiting before you, and that is the trade of spin. But I can only encourage, I mean, you used to do it, I used to do it, and that is, you'd go out into your backyard of an afternoon after school, and you'd put a hanky down halfway, on a good length in your backyard, and you would spend hour after hour after hour trying to get the ball to bounce on the hanky. And that was the only way. So, you see, spinners, it's a craft that you can't learn overnight. It's a lifelong occupation, and every spinner will say this to you. And that is, the more you learn about spinning, the more you realise you've got to learn.
Roy, the other thing that I find amazing when you talk about spinners is, the hard men of cricket. When you think of D.K. Lilly, Jeff Thompson, the great, Andy Roberts, John
They all started as spinners, you know that, don't you?
That's true.
Yeah.
They all wanted to be spinners.
They were failed spinners. I always look at a fast bowler and I say, here is a failed spinner.
A bloke who couldn't cut it, tweaking. And what I was going to say was that I think that the great New Zealand spinner, John Bracewell, gives the lie to the fact that you can't be a hard man and spin. Because let's face it, there's no one harder in the game. There's no one shouts, how's that with more authority? And you think of recently how well Australia's been served by Dutchy Holland and Bruce Yardley in this game.
Yeah, they're very hard, man.
Oh, they're
merciless.
They really scare you out as much as get you out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did a bit of work in the nets with Bruce Yardley, with Roo. And honestly, he just was so physically intimidating, much in the manner of, say, Lance Cairns or even an Ian Botham, who, of course, were very big, burly customers. And when Johnny Bracewell, upon delivering a ball, would deliberately walk that extra 15, 20, 25 paces and would be, literally 2 or 3 inches away from you. There was nothing more daunting, especially when he was appealing and bellowing at you, and then would sledge if the appeal was turned down, like he'd say, "You're a dork, I'm getting you." And it is intimidating.
Especially when he arrived before the ball.
Well, yeah, which on occasion he would do.
Well, that was when he was looping.
He'd throw up a loop, and he'd arrive down there, and he'd be saying, "What are you going to do with this?" And the ball's coming down, you're thinking, "John, please, excuse me, I'd rather play the ball if you don't mind." And he's still bellowing in your ear, and the ball's still coming down. Most distracting.
England 2 for none. The outswinger is working. Where is the sloop? West Indies 3 for 5. You've got the inswinger coming back. Where is the sloop? Bob Simpson, legend captain and spinner, lifts the shirt and reveals all in a series of remarkable documentaries on the linear relation between hand and pants. In this award-winning series, Take the Long Handle, Simo, with slow-motion footage and nude living models, graphically explains the nexus of the angle of incidence and the angle of projection. Supermodels Abdul Qadir, Asif Masood, Paddles Hadley and our very own Johnny Gleeson make the mysterious commonplace when they plonk all 11 fingers on the table for all to see. So if you're having trouble bringing one back to the right-hander, if you're darting when you should be looping, if you're dressing to the left when the offside field is stacked, then 1 hour's careful study of Take the Long Handle nightly can have you screaming Friday at 11 a.m. I'll polish the ball first up for you, Skip.
Roy, one of the things that I think has blossomed in the last few years, and this is where I think the Packer revolution has made an enormous difference, is halftime entertainment at the cricket. And I know often the cricket can be fairly dull if, Australia are playing the West Indies. It
When
can
the
often
spinners are on.
When a couple of spinners are on and, nothing much is happening. I often sort of look up at the clock at, say, about 11:05 and think, oh, you beauty, there's only 1 hour, 55 minutes to go to lunch. And by the time the people get off, it'll be, say, 2 hours' time, and they'll have some halftime entertainment on. And I think Australia has been blessed in this area, probably better than any other cricketing nation in the world, at the innovation in halftime entertainment. Of course, those lucky enough to say to get down to the SCG would be able to see a Gaspo balloon display. On the next day, they might see jumping dogs catching frisbees with their teeth.
Yeah.
At other times, they might be able to see a version of Kanga cricket by one of the suburban schools.
I'll tell you what I really love seeing HG, and they bring them out on occasion all over Australia. I love to see the police tent pegging team. And you set the pegs down near the pitch area, and they come out on the horses and pick the pegs up with their swords. And it's fantastic, fantastic entertainment. And I love seeing the hell drivers on occasion too, the Holden hell drivers. I think they put on a terrific bit of entertainment. Sure, it chews up the pitch a little bit, but hey, it's a sacrifice worth making, I reckon. I know a lot of people just go to the cricket these days just to see the entertainment and leave when the cricket's on.
Another aspect of it is that I think that if there was promoted a little better...
What, the cricket, the tent pegging or the hell drivers?
If they promoted, if the cricket board took time...
Well, if in the paper there was a big banner, hell drivers, tent pegging the Australian policemen, and underneath Test cricket. Yeah, I guess you're right. That could work.
I was going to say also, Roy, that a lot of things I think we need to get back to folk arts too. I was thinking of some of the times I used to come and watch you play up at Lithgow. We'd be able to park the cars on the edge of the oval, and I think that it's well worth knocking down a couple of the stands at some of the cricket grounds, except say at Adelaide, to get some more cars in there, so as people can actually sit in the cars, especially on an afternoon where there's a bit of a southerly blowing or a cooler wind blowing.
So you put the windows down.
Put the windows down, have the breeze blowing in. You'd have your picnic hamper in the back.
A thermos.
Indeed, because this is how Bob Menzies used to go to the cricket. He'd just pull up in the roller, and if it was good enough for him, I don't see why it's not good enough for average Australians. Now, the other thing is that always of those sort of things, somebody would actually have something in the boot, like a greased pig or a python snake. Or I remember once I went to the cricket and I saw a duck there. I think Greg Chappell might have been batting at the time, and they'd let it go out in the middle, and then it'd be on for young and old to see who could actually get it. Now, I think that this is something which the Australian Cricket Board should
encourage. I love seeing that sort of thing. And, when I used to go to the cricket as a kiddie with Mum and Dad, you always used to wonder why Dad was taking a big bottle of olive oil with a rabbit or a ferret. And, at lunchtime, as lunchtime was getting close, Dad would get out, undo the boot, take the ferret out, pour the oil all over it, and he'd just let it go and say, off you shoot, kiddies, catch it. It was great fun.
And, I think that there's a further step to this. Let's say we had a couple of greased pigs, at the Gabba one day, and we had a competition, first kiddie to bag the pig, and then the first person to stand over and slaughter the pig, and the first person to blood the pig, and then the first person to get a barbecue going and get, you may be out of the pickets, fence, why not, pull off a few pickets, and then barbecuing it up. And because I think that's what people lack at the cricket, especially at Shield games, a genuine reason to see something which they wouldn't have seen somewhere else, during the week, either on television, say,
unless they worked at, say, a slaughterhouse or something.
Indeed, that's right. That's right. On the other hand, they would have seen all the test matches on the TV during the week, and so when they got down there, what they'd be going away from cricket is not remembering, Dutchy Holland's magnificent
fighting 10.
That's right. That's right. But they'd remember the marvellous halftime display with the greased pig.
Look, I spoke to AB about this some time back, and when there was a greased pig let go at the Sydney Cricket Ground one year, and AB thought it was terrific. In fact, he and I think it might have been Gary Cozier who was playing at the time. He and Gary went out and started chasing the pig themselves. They were so excited about it. And, I think, if you've got an entertainment that gets the cricketers excited, and they're the hardest people in the world to get excited about anything, then just imagine what the effect is going to be on the public. Let's go and catch the greasy pig. Have they got a greasy pig today, Mum? There's nothing like it, and I have seen this. The pig caught and surrounded by a bunch of kiddies, all armed with cricket bats, just thrashing the life out of it. It's terrific, and then you can just, one of the kiddies holds it up, and then they use it as a ball, they kick it around, they throw it to each other, and eventually it gets torn up into little bits, nibbly bits, and they're easy to cook. Oh, I think it's terrific. I love it. Families love it, and cricket should love it.
How's That is the test match computer game. Ever wanted to play the game the way the pros do, slowly? Ever wanted to hold up an end, John Edrich style? Ever wanted to be Jeff Boycott playing for a draw on a flat pitch on day 2 at the MCG? Kiddies, the software is here. 30 years in development from the minds that created Mac Plus. Roy and HG's fully colour-coded How's That? The test match is the only computer game in the world that forces you to think for the whole 5 days. It's all there, built in, the slow overrate, the appeals against the light, the long wait while the covers are produced, the use of the heavy roller, the collusion between captains when a draw seems likely. Enthusiasts, there are no shortcuts. When the game kicks off on day 1, the software cannot be removed until day 5 at 6 p.m. How's That is ideal for parents of hyperactive kiddies who want them indoors and quiet for the best of 5 series, including tour matches.
Well, Roy, that brings us to the end of side 1 of Wicket to Wicket, and what are we going to talk about on the other side?
Well, let's have a cup of tea, turn the cassette over, and go with personalities.
Hello everyone, Jim Maxwell here again, and welcome back to side 2 of Wicket to Wicket with rampaging Roy Slaven and H.G. Nelson. Stay with us as Roy and H.G. pull on the pads, plunge the protector down the front of the shorts, get a bat out of the rack, wander out of the dressing room and take a short walk to the crease and open the innings for Australia.
I'm just wondering if we could break it up a little bit now.
I do.
And we look at, say, 5 distinct captains. I mean, in the modern era, I think the world has been blessed with fantastic array of captains. You only have to look around, speaking of the subcontinent, the Lion of Lahore, Imran Khan comes to mind. Then you think of Australia's recent history course. AB's been there for some time, but before AB, one great captain, Kim Hughes, a bloke who cried off on the job and then ran away to South Africa in a marvellous display for all kiddies to follow. You go back before Kim, it was, of course, the great Greg Chappell. Before Greg Chappell, it was Ian Chappell, and so on, back through the annals of time. And then, of course, England is very similar. It's, of course, Gucci's led the triumphant England tour to a recent, sojourn in the West Indies. Before him, there was Gower, and before Gower, well, it gets a bit hazy there. Did Gadding have a go, and then Gower had another go, and Gadding had another go, and so on. And so, Roy, wherever you look around the world, Viv, of course, has led the West Indies, and before Viv it was Clive, and before Clive was probably Garfield Sabres, and so on. Now, Roy, I'm just wondering, who are the great captains, and what makes them great? Would Bishan Beatty be the first person to talk about?
I think Bishan Beatty was a most respected captain, HG. A captain is only as good as not so much his runs on the board on the field, or the number of catches he takes, or the number of wickets he gets. It's whether he commands authority, both on the paddock and in the dressing room. And I've often said that a captain's work is never done. People don't realise the amount of work a captain does do. I remember speaking with Bobby Simpson when he came back into the job captaining Australia in 1977 after the split with WSC, Kerry Packer's lot.
That's where Hoggy got to start. And Peter Toohey. And marvellous team it was too, most underrated, and I think history will judge that team very, very kindly. I was speaking to Bobby Simpson about it. I said, Bob, having come back on board as a captain, is there anything you'd forgotten?
And he said, Roy, there is. I'd forgotten the pressure, and people don't realise, the pressure that haunts you, his words, not mine, 24 hours a day. As soon as you get up, there's someone on the phone. It could be Henry Blofeld, it could be anyone wanting to interview you. You've got to be diplomatic right from the word go. You might say, as Bobby said one morning, he woke up, there was Henry Blofeld on the line, he had to speak with him. There was David Lord on the line, he had to speak with him. There was a knock at the door, it was Peter Toohey, he was sick and he dirtied his trousers and his flannels and he didn't know what to wear. Alan Hurst arrived, he had a flat tyre out the front and he was supposed to be driving them to the SCG. It just kept going on and on and on. He had to deal with each of these things because the manager can't cut any authority, so Bobby had to address each of these things much in the manner of a politician. And Bobby said it was important at the end of the day that every I was dotted and every T crossed, and you had to make sure that you put every team member into bed, tucked them in, made sure their trousers were out and what have you, shirts, etc. Their whole uniform was out, spread on the bed opposite, ready for them to get up in the next morning. The structure of the day's activities had been rooted into their mind, meshed into their mind, so they knew they'd keep their mind on the job, so they knew what was coming up tomorrow. You had to deal with management, you had to deal with the press, and I think the person who's done that most successfully throughout the years has been the great Bishop Beattie, because no one expected Bishop to be able to cope with it. He's very halting with his use of language. He was a failure at school. He was a very modest spin bowler. He was obsessed with wearing trinkets on him. He was very vain. He was very vague. He didn't know what country ever he was in. He didn't know if people were friends of his or not. He was not a politician. He'd go blank whenever you mentioned the word Sarfraz Nawaz to him. He was very, very strange. But yet, when captaincy was bestowed upon him, thrust upon him, he rose to become, I think, one of the finest captains that's ever emerged from the subcontinent. So the job can either make you or break you. In the case of Kim Hughes, sure, it broke him, but he ended up a better person. In the case of Bishop Beattie, it made him and made him a great person.
And of course, who can forget the work of Mike Brearley? He was a bloke who couldn't bat, couldn't bowl, couldn't field, could barely carry the drinks tray from memory, and often, in his 12th person for a side, would often be found in the gutter, asleep, having tied one on, waiting for the over to break. But Mike Brearley, of course, a bloke who loves wearing the skirt, came out in the middle of the British team at that particular time and led them to marvellous victories from a position of never being able to do anything in the game. And Roy, I think you're so right when you say it's a job that starts at 4 in the morning when Blowers is on the blower, and then you've got to face the people from the ABC, Jimmy Maxwell and people like that. Cook breakfast for them all, entertain them all, because let's face it, the press can't do anything for themselves in this day and age, Roy. They want to be waited on hand and foot with faxes and printouts of scores and statistics. They can't even add a bruns anymore, the press these days.
It's got to be done
but
by the
Mike
captain.
Brearley did all of this, and then of course
he's a marvellous professor of history, and I think he took that objectivity onto the paddock with him, HG. I think Mike Brearley, and I've said this, I've put this case to him, that he was viewing the game from about 4 or 5 years down the track. He was looking back at it, and I think this gave him a very curious perspective, and I don't know any other player, any other captain who's been able to do that. Most react to the circumstances as they present themselves. If say, let's pick a batsman, let's say Desi Haynes is proving to be a little bit flighty outside the off stump. You might think, well, listen, you might have a chat to the both, tickle them, put them outside the off stump and break them away a little bit, and we might get something here. Brearley would never do that. He'd just sit and daydream and imagine how history will judge his performance 4 or 5 years down the track. Very vague in that way, and so the players could get on and do what they did best, and that is rely on their instincts. Brearley never spoke with any of the players. He never spoke with management, he never spoke with the press. He just communicated with himself in his history books. And I think that made him a very, very curious person. And of course, as you say, wore the skirt on occasion. And I think this held him in enormous stead. And I think the players respected that because they knew that Mike Brearley was someone who was best left alone. There goes, well, who was that? That's Mike Brearley, that's our captain. Just leave him alone. And I think they respected him for that and got on with and did their jobs. And unlike Botham, who was always bursting into their dressing rooms and short-sheeting the beds and throwing ice water down their pants and undoing the stitching on the gusset of their trousers and tying their bootlaces together and then putting chewing gum on their pillows and that sort of thing, which, might work for another team, but it didn't work with that particular English team. And I think Brearley, a brilliant strategist, was capable of distancing himself and therefore the whole team from what was going on.
And of course you come to the Australian captains and people like Greg and Ian Chappell, and they ruled with an iron rod, didn't they? Because Ian
he could bat a little bit, I suppose, and could certainly roll the arm over if required. But this great contribution was in the sledging department, where he often outthought the players psychologically by accusing them of coming from uncertain heritage, of saying that he had been out with their mum the night before, and this obviously upset a lot of them. And then, of course, he employed the Javid Mindad tactic by suggesting that certain bowlers should be driving a bus, or certain batters should be, out the back in the pavilion putting the barbecue chops on or something like that. The great heights I think that sledging has achieved since Chappell's left is, of course, in the hands of Rod Hogg, who unfortunately didn't get a chance to captain Australia because he's got...
He should have done. It's one of the great crimes.
Indeed. It's one of the great unfortunate passages of how cruel cricket can be, is the history and cricket, because Roddy didn't get a chance to captain Australia. But he has taken sledging to an even higher pinnacle because he sledges his own team.
Look, I agree with you, H.G. And another captain that I've admired for many, many years is the great Graham Yallop. And Graham would threaten the most curious things with players. I know with Hoggy, he would threaten to share a dressing room with him if Hoggy didn't perform. And I know he spent a lot of time just clutching Rodney's buttocks in public. And Rodney took umbrage at this. And I think this brought out the venom and the fire in him and turned him into a world-class fast bowler as far as I'm concerned. He was a hopeless dud before Graham started going the grab. And I know on tour that Graham would go up to Rodney Hogg, for example, and much in the manner of Mervyn A.B. with a tongue out, and just whisper in Roddy's ear, if we're not performing today, Hoggsy, as he called him, guess who's going to be sharing the room with you? And Hoggy's just, in a gruff way, just sort of go, well, what do you mean? And he'd say, Hoggsy, baby. He used to put that in. Hoggsy, baby, it'll be with me. And he would put in an enormous amount of effort. And I know Graham threatened the whole team. Gary Cozier, for example, was very, very frightened, pardon me, very, very frightened of Captain Yallop, because he didn't know what to expect. Some nights he'd get in late, having a bit of a night out, he'd go into his digs, open the door, try to hop into bed, and who'd be in there but Yallop, Graham Yallop, nude, and with a smile, a leer, dare I say it, on his face. And, Gary would say, well, what are you doing here, Captain, as they called him, Captain Yallop. And he'd say, you didn't perform very well. You've been very naughty. I'm here to sort you out. And, of course, then they'd all break down into giggles and he'd leave the room, etc. But the point was made, and that's the important thing, that the captain's influence was always there, all pervasive into every avenue and aspect of their being.
Hello, I'm Jim Schwartzman, and there's an old saying, this goes with that, and it really is the secret of decorating. Be bold and simply choose the colours and textures that express your personality. That's why I, personally, choose Angus Fraser paints, because if you have nothing to say, the whole world can hear it. The boss has tried it and given it the thumbs up. Merv pours it straight onto the tongue. Stumpy puts a few drops in his beer. What is it? It's AB's steak sauce, now available in 2 flavours, red and brown.
2 aspects of this that I want to discuss with you, Roy. Firstly, the companion for the captain. And of course, we all know the history and the marvellous deeds that Graham Yallop got out of Rod Hogg by the technique that you suggest. And then, of course, there's the AB Merv Hughes axis. And, of course, we're only speaking with the well-known seer from the United States, whose name conveniently escapes me.
Jay-Z Knight, Ramtha, that one.
You're in, Roy. Now, of course, she anticipated or foresaw or realised that Merv and AB... Soothsayed, yes. Merv and AB in previous lives were courtesan and top dog, I was going to say, in the brothel of the 14th century. Dog, of course, is a very scurrilous term because Merv turns out a treat in the cross-dressing stakes.
Oh, he was on the Ottoman.
He was on the Ottoman, and AB was the madam, and the top girl in the establishment was Merv. Now, of course, it comes to this live, and we see that Merv and AB have teamed up again to thrill the world, basically, because this place that they were in before was on the crossroads, Marco Polo style of the world trade routes. And,
where Persia met, around near Constantinople.
Yeah, that's right. And they did a roaring business.
Where the Silk Road met the Spices Road.
That's right, yeah. And then onto Europe, or back to the origins of the silk and the spices, should you be going in the other direction and taking a tour out that way, as, of course, Mike Brearley's ancestors often did. I was going to say, though, that in this modern era, we see now Merv going on a lot of tours with AB and having very little to do. Witness the recent tour of New Zealand, the short tour of New Zealand.
Yes.
Now, can this work, and are there other examples of that? Would you consider that, say...
Yes, I think Doug Walters was an example of that. Doug, of course, could only be relied upon to score when the team didn't need runs. When the team needed runs desperately, Doug was found wanting. I think, in the manner of Murph, he was there as a courtesan, as a sort of court jester, as someone just to keep the captain happy, satisfied, on the job. Any physical needs would be answered by that particular player. In this instance, in the Doug instance, of course, it was the great Ian Chappell, and before him, the great Richie Benaud. And I know Richie often said to me privately that it wouldn't matter who was going on tour or what sort of team he was taking with him overseas, as long as it had Doug Walters in it. And I know Ian felt the same. And I always felt there was a sort of connection there between Benaud and Chapel Eye, that they had been down certain roads together and had shared experience. And I think an instance of the shared experience was certainly Doug Walters, who was a marvellous bloke off the paddock. He loved a game of cards. He was just like an ordinary bloke. But at night, he'd turn on the neon lights, and he was terrific. And I think Merv fulfilled the same role in New Zealand.
And I'm wondering if you can trace the downfall of certain captains by the fact that they didn't have this person. I mean, Kim Hughes couldn't find anybody to like in the team. For instance, I know
Bill Laurie.
Bill Laurie, the same sort of thing, and probably you can trace the Dwales in Australian cricket.
Well,
to this
Bill Laurie
time.
tried to forge a bit of that sort of relationship, I think, with Keith Stackpole, and I know they shared digs in one tour of the West Indies. And unfortunately, things didn't go quite according to Bill's imagination, and I think Keith stormed out one night in a fit of pique and took umbrage, what have you, and things didn't quite work out.
The other person in the who talking captains, of course, you come to the great Richie Benaud. Now, Richie, as nearly as I can tell,
he'd forged a relationship with every player.
Yeah, and I was going to say, he had a very quaint. What would I call it? Quaint sort of habits after work. I'm using that work in the modern era. You go out and put on the pads and do a day at the coalface, knocking up 300 runs.
In the old days, it was called play.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny.
You'd play cricket. You wouldn't work cricket.
No, that's the funny thing is, and
you played the ball rather than work the ball.
Yeah, I've traced the downfall of Australian cricket to the time that crept into the lexicon of commentators and the players' thoughts. But he would often go to the movies, wouldn't he, after a game, and see, say, Danish Blue or
Salome.
Yeah, Yellow Love or something like that. One of these racy sort of raincoat sort of movies. And I'm just wondering, Roy, if you think that he made some of his worst decisions while at the movies, because after all, a lot of the players wanted to play cards and have a drink and be ordinary blokes and pick up dames and stuff like that, as you would if you were saying Lithgow and Uriupa or something like that, but not Richie.
Look, Richie Benaud, HG, I've always regarded as the last of the great patrician captains. Captains of the later modern era have seen themselves as more ensemble types. They like to see themselves as being part of the team. Richie never did that. He would stress time and time again that he was above the team. And this, of course, he learnt from the great Ted Dexter, another fantastic and enormous giant of a figure that dominated the game for many, many years, Lord Ted, who was, in fact, a real patrician. And Richie, I think, lived in his shadow for a little while and adopted many of his mannerisms, much in the manner of his speech, and his very bearing. I still say confidently in 1990, as I'm speaking now, that no one cut quite the shape Richie Benaud did in a tuxedo. And Richie was always the first. As soon as we came off, we'd take our flannels off and, I'd get into some track pants or something like that, or a pair of comfortable slacks with which I could wear, around the streets and not be noticed all that much, and just go into a pub, with a few of the other blokes and Dave-O, etc., have a beer. But, or a game of cards, Jim Rummy, as you said. But Richie would come off immediately, take off his flannels, have a shower and put on the tux. And he would then get a cab, often with Tony Gregg, often with Ted Dexter himself. I remember one night he asked me if I'd like to come, and I felt really embarrassed because I didn't have anything to wear. Richie said, "Don't worry, I know somewhere, I'm in league with a lot of the local amateur theatre companies, and they do have quite a large, array of costumes." And he phoned up one of the smaller companies in London and said, "Hello, this is Richard Benaud here," and I could hear them aghast on the other end of the line. And I went around with them. Richie came as well, and we went backstage.
We met Sir Laurence Olivier. We met a few of the luminaries, Tony Quinn. He called him Tony in those days. Richie, Tony, good to see you, that sort of thing. And in fact, it was Tony Quinn's, and it wasn't Tony Quinn, sorry, it was Tony Quayle's tuxedo that eventually I borrowed. He was doing a terrific production at the time of a little-known play that involved a lot of the cast wearing tuxedos, and I borrowed that, and off we went, off we shot. And he said, "I'm going to open your eyes tonight, Roy," and he took me, Ted Dexter, and the very, very young Tony Greig to a show that, I'd never seen anything like it. We had to go across the channel to Paris to see it. It was called Folies Bergère. And, I've seen postcards that blokes brought back from the war of, people in lewd attitude, and, they caused a bit of a wry smirk, and, a few blokes to have a bit of a fiddle with different parts of their anatomy that you normally aren't referred to. And, Richie had a table, it was all booked and everything. We were right up the front, and, the concierge knew Richie very well, Pierre, and Pierre said, "Richie, lovely to see you again. You've brought some chums." And, yeah, and we sat down there, and Lord Ted and myself and Tony Greig, and, there was Richie, and we were all, looking terrific. And people came out and did lewdish things, to my mind. You remember, these were many, many years ago, actually, and our attitudes towards entertainment have changed very, very much. And, after a while, they came out, a lot of people came out dancing with very little on, G-strings, I think they're called. And then they got Richie up, and it was as if, I don't know, as if it was normal, there was no, Mr. Benno, would you like to join us? Richie just knew on cue when to stand up, and the spotlight hit him immediately. I was embarrassed, I tried to hide under the table, but Richie tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Roy, it's all right." He got up on stage with him. Next thing I knew, his pants were down around his ankles. He'd taken off the dicky front of the shirt. He'd taken the coat off, obviously, to get to the dicky. And there he was, as naked as a day, with his gear down around his ankle. And I thought, hello, is this Australia's Test captain? What are people going to think of this? And he took the duds off completely, and he did that fabulous dance where, people all kick in unison, the high kick, and people applaud at that moment. And, all the French people, there were a lot there, they all stood up and threw their hats towards Richie and threw coins and threw all sorts of things. And Richie came back down afterwards. He was all a lather of sweat, and highly excited. The excitement was incredibly obvious, really, now I think about it. Anyway, he sat down, put his gear back on, and he said, "What did you think of that, Roy?" And I said, "I'm blown away. I don't know what to think, Richie." He said, "You're coming up with me." And he said, "Oh, bugger that, Richie, you'll never get me up there." He said, "If you don't, you'll never be captain of Australia." And he said, while I was up there, a few things occurred to me. I think I might get Davo to open from the southern end tomorrow morning. I think we might put you a deep third man, or better than that, I think we might work a fly slip. And, a fly slip hadn't occurred to me for, years. I'd never seen it. And I had to ask Richie what he meant by it. And he said, "I get a lot of my ideas when I'm up there completely self-actualised, when I'm parading myself au naturel, surrounded by a bevy of showbiz entertainment types. It's in those moments that brilliant ideas come to me, pardon me, that otherwise my normal working life I'd never have insight into." We went back from Calais, back over to Dover, of course, and then drove back down to our digs where we were billeted. And, Richie got up the next morning. He looked immaculate. He put his creams back on. We went out. Davo opened from the southern end. I was at fly slip. And Jeff Boycott was batting. And it was honestly, actually, it was a dream pitch. It was chock-a-block full of runs. And second ball, boom, straight to me. Richie came over to me and gave me a wink and said, "How about you drop the strides tonight, Roy?"
Why hasn't the Australian Test 11 ever included a cricketer called Mario, Boris, Nut, Torstein or Sven? Expecting parents, take note. And if you have dreams of your nipper wearing the baggy green cap, when the doctor says, "Yep, there's a hint of green and gold," get with the strength and call him Jim, Doug, Max, Les or Ian, and you won't be sorry, and neither will Australia.
Stumps have been called, you've won, but there's still a lot of life in the old legs yet. You're too wound up to change, off you shoot. How can you do it and still turn heads? Easy. Because you had the foresight at 10:30 that morning to pull Night Creams, the clobber for night clubbing cricketers. Night Creams at all David Jones capital city stores. The longer you wear them, the better they look.
Well, Roy, it's interesting, isn't it? And I'll never forget nights when Richie wasn't able to get to the Folies Bergère. You know, we were touring in other parts of the world, you know, like on the subcontinent or
Lahore.
Lahore,
In the subcontinent.
Yes, indeed. Or
Faisalabad.
in the West Indies. And he'd
Port
often...
of Spain.
He'd often don the plastic Mac and go out
yeah.
and seek out a film, especially a Swedish sort of film that was on at the local art cinema in Lahore. You know, sort of I'm a Curious Yellow or...
Did Bill Laurie go with him?
Yes, Bill went with him a number of times.
And Bobby Simpson, I suppose.
Yes. Well,
The three, the triumvirate.
That's right. Well, they got booted out of many a place. I remember especially I'm Curious Yellow, where they played cricket right down the front, just trying out a few of the ideas they got while they were sitting there watching the film. The audience got a little bit restless, and in the end, you know, really they were causing a ruckus. But I blame Laurie's nose, the growth in Laurie's nose over the years to Bill's, yes, to some of the work that he saw there in those days, and certainly
Wearing a sort of Pinocchio in.
Pinocchio factor. Yes, and I think that you know, he's sort of beautifully balanced now with the nose upstairs and of course the rest of the equipment downstairs.
Yeah, and you'd attribute that to Richie.
I would, introducing him to the marvellous delights of foreign cinema, and of course they moved on. They probably watched the Decameron 450,000 times.
Well, I remember going to see the Decameron when it first opened with Richie Benaud. He phoned me up out of the blue and said he had a party together. And that this wildly erotic film, art house film as he described it, not erotic, he never used that word, was showing. I said, Richie, I'd love to come. Who's coming? He said, Simo's with me, Bill's with me, Ted Dexter's in town, he's with me. Let's go. And we made up a party. And, you know, we sat in the back of the cab, all of us. It was a big cab. And we're all sitting in the back there. And, you know, it was one of those cabs that had two bench seats, one facing the other. And Richie brought out he had a little sort of Gladstone bag with him that he carried everywhere. I never knew it was in bag. Well, I had a bit of an insight on this night. He brought out a little cruet, I suppose, of oil. Chrism, he called it. And he said, we're going to see this film, it's a top film. I just want each of you to pour a little bit of this down your dacks. And I thought, hello, what are you talking about, Richie? What's going on here? He said, it'll pay off in the long run, don't worry. And he passed it around. It was sort of like a quasi-religious experience, you know, and sure, the oil came through on the pants, you know, but thankfully, Richie had pointed out, he said, before you come, he said, Roy, wear very dark pants. I thought, all right, it's one of those nights, you know, Richie, you never question it. You know, it's the same as he says, you know, feel at silly point, you do it, you don't question it. I said, all right, I'll wear the dark pants. Anyway, we each poured a little bit of oil. It was just like olive oil, I suppose, down our duds. And, you know, just sort of ran down the anatomy, down the slope. And we then, you know, did our pants up and stuff like that. And then we just went in, sat in the front row and watched the film. And I must admit, it didn't do anything for me. But I did notice a fair bit of agitation and fiddling happening nearby, if you know what I mean. And when at the end of the film, you know, the blokes were enormously satisfied. Most of it went over my head, but then again, that sort of erotic Italio-Euro imagery is a bit lost on me.
Well, I was going to say the other thing, of course, is the food that Richie would consume, and I've never known a bloke to eat like Richie. And of course, it was none of your sort of chop and three veg stuff. It was all that sort of you know, oysters and you know, anything slightly on the aphrodisiacal side. You know, tangerines and avocados and stuff like that. And often, you know, at the end of a night, you know, you would really see this trail of as he went up, dropping out of the cuffs of the trousers. You know, the prawn heads and the avocado pips and that sort of stuff as he wandered up out of there.
Yeah.
And he wondered how the bloke was able to carry it all around in the trouser and eat it, and then also put the remnant back out in there without anybody noticing.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I mean, I know at drinks often, you know, we'd be sculling out a little bit of, you know, Lucozade or something like that, or Staminade, one of those. Orange juice often, minor fruit cup sometimes. Minor fruit cup lemon. And, you know, Richie had just turned his back on us all, you know, and just fossick around in his duds. And next thing you know, he's dropping an oyster. He's eating an oyster. And other times I saw him, as you say, have a prawn. Other times I saw him get out, a fillet of flathead, just out of his duds, you know, would have been smoked. Have that. And, you know, I said to him every now and again, Richie, what are you doing that for? And he just tapped his nose and said, never you mind, Roy, never you mind. You know, you young blokes don't have the sort of night work ahead of you that us more senior players do.
enigmatically he said that. Meant nothing to me at the time. I just shrugged and thought, hello, that's Richie. Now I think about it, the bloke was actually on the job, so to speak, 24 hours a day.
Yes, and when you come to look back over the zany life of Richie Benaud, Roy, it's a little wonder that he is the dominant figure still in Australian cricket. I mean, as you'd point out, he's lived life to the full.
He has. He's like, all his experiences are just brimming with all sorts of life, actually. He's experienced both sides of the tracks. He's experienced life on the inside and life on the outside at the same time. He has, I think, more insight into the caper than any other living Australian or any other living cricket-playing person in the world. It doesn't surprise me that his insights into the understanding of the game are absolutely beyond peer with anybody else. The BBC want him all the time. He's always on the blower to the West Indies. The subcontinent, they're screaming out for more Benaud gear, i.e. for him to commentate on the game between, say, Pakistan and India. Here, of course, he's recognised as the father of post-war cricket, the finest commentator. And the thing is, he's like a three-dimensionist. He understands, unlike, say, Ian Chappell or Keithy Stackpole, terrific blokes, or Bill Lawry, marvellous blokes, but they only have a two-dimensional understanding of the game. They only see it in terms of length and breadth. I think what Richie has done is imbued it with the three dimensions. That is, the third dimension being what happens off the paddock. Because Richie knows that what happens off the paddock, more often than not, has the greatest influence over what happens on the paddock.
Yeah, so true, Roy. And if only the camera, when you see him commentating, could draw back a little bit and see that he's sitting on a plate of prawns with both feet and avocado dip and salad over the private parts.
That's right.
And there's a couple of people feasting off him
and
as
if he could get rhino horns and that sort of thing, he would.
He'd eat them.
He'd eat them. He loves anything that smacks of masculinity and propagation of the species. All those things he can't get enough of.
Rowdy Mallet, the life story, is now out under the title Born Rowdy. Read about the day Ashley laid the brown Axminster all over the Sheffield Shield, about the day he tore off Bishan Beatty's turban and lifted the wig, about the day he pantsed the Queen Mum, about the night he sculled the yard at the Taj Mahal, and the day he full-mooned the Dalai Lama. That's the life story of Rowdy Mallet, Born Rowdy, as told to Morris West.
Well, Roy, of course, you can't talk long about cricket without coming to a discussion, and especially about cricketing personalities, without coming to a discussion of the wags in the game. And, in the modern era, we've been blessed. You only have to look across Australia briefly to see a marvellous range of wags, from Fat Cat Ritchie in Queensland to Merv Hughes in Victoria to Greggy Matthews in New South Wales to the great David Hooks in South Australia. But, of course, Australia's been blessed with a long tradition that dates back through, say, Dougie Walters, Bill Lawry, Stacky, Norm O'Neill, Jeff Thompson. It's all over the place. There's so many wags we could talk about. Davo. And then overseas you look at people like Derek Randall and Deadly Derek Underwood, going back to Freddie Truman. But I'm just wondering if we might be able to focus on a person who I consider the great wagster of all time in Australian cricket, and that's Doug Walters. Now, as everyone knows, he loved to smoke, loved to drink, loved to play cards, hated the game of cricket, Roy. But his drinking really helped him play the game, didn't it, Roy? I'll never forget that innings in Western Australia. We got 100 between lunch and tea, or was it just after tea? And he was just basically legless the whole time. And I'm just wondering if the drinking helped him play the game and put the absolute boredom of cricket out of his mind and enabled him to go on and score all those magnificent centuries.
I'm sure it did, HG. I mean, it's got to be more than accident or accidental that Doug's great scores came immediately, the morning after a night on the tiles that you couldn't believe that a human could consciously put themselves through that sort of torture or punishment. Doug would punish himself to within an inch of death. And look, I can remember one night with Doug. Was just about lights out really, and I don't know if you recall the old coal scuttles you used to be able to get, HG, where you just leave them against the fire there. Anyway, Doug filled up a coal scuttle full of beer, and he set up a sort of, not a filter, but a sort of funnel running into his mouth. And he just lay there and said, Roy, just before you go to bed, could you knock the scuttle over so that it starts to pour into the funnel I've got here? And I said, Doug, you out and you play. You've had about 20 or 30, 40 or 50 beers, since we came off, stopped work at 6 o'clock. He said, okay, mate, I've got a feeling there's a big one coming tomorrow. And when I say that, he was speaking in a slurred sort of manner that indicated that he was well and truly. Anyway, so I did him the favour. I pushed the scuttle over and I could hear the dripping well into the night. In fact, it kept me awake, and I came down at about 2 a.m, I suppose, and I said, Doug, get to bed, mate. He said, it's all right, Roy, there's just a little bit left in it, and could you just push it over a little bit further? And I pushed the scuttle over, and there was still a few beers left in there, or a few, a bit of volume left in there, and anyway, he finished it off, and he said, before you go, because I went to the toilet, on my way back through the kitchen, I said to, Doug, you coming to bed now? He said, Roy, see if there's anything else in the fridge, if you wouldn't mind. And I had a look in the fridge, and there was a bottle of, an old bottle of, it was a flat one, a Riesling, as I recall, that Richie Benno had. He'd only had a couple of sips out of it. You understand, he'd used that the following night as a cooking condiment or ingredient. I said, there's that here, and he said, shove it down the funnel, Roy, on your way. And I did, and I went up to bed, and I suppose it was about 6 o'clock when I could hear these noises coming from downstairs. I went down again, and Doug's at the, breaking open the gin bottle, in the cabinet there. And I said, Doug, you should be in bed. He said, Roy, the day's only starting. And he sculled, the best part of it, 3/4 bottle of Gooby's gin. I said, Doug, you've got to be mad. He said, shut up, Roy, I'm going to bed. Off he went, and he woke up, I suppose, about 8 o'clock. He was up well before I was. He'd had a shower, he'd shave, he'd done himself up, he had his bandana on his neckerchief sort of thing on, and he looked a picture of health, and I knew that man must have been going through agony. He went out there and scored a ton in between breakfast and lunch. It was the most extraordinary innings I'd ever seen. And when he came off, he collapsed in the corner in a pool of vomit. And I said, Doug, why did you punish yourself? And he said, as you pointed out, HG, he said, because the game bores the living bejesus out of me. And there's only one way I can cope, and that is to try and kill every cell in my head that suggests to me that there's a world away from cricket.
And Roy, when you come to look at those records that he holds, of course, there's magnificent runs and feats with the ball and, carrying the drinks out and so on. None of them.
49 test wickets too. People forget that. 49 test wickets.
Yes, a lot of people are lucky to get one. Chris Matthews hasn't got any.
That's right, a partnership breaker. He was a partnership breaker. Whenever they got, 400 or 500, just two batsmen out there, batting for 5 days, someone would think, hey, give Doug a bowl, and he'd get him out.
Now listen, Roy, the record that I know he's most proud of is that world record for the number of cans consumed the flight between Mascot and Heathrow. Now, a lot of people bag this record because basically they say the planes today are much faster than they were then. And of course, Roddy Marsh has a stab at the record, and of course, I think Stumpy Boone actually holds it now at the rate of 58 cans. But Stumpy's and Roddy's were team assisted. Doug sat there by himself and just sculled the can after the can after the can. Sure, he might have a burp or something like that and have to walk down to the end of the plane and have join the Mile High Club, and have a bit of a leak. But when he got back to his seat, he just kept going by himself. He didn't need artificial stimulants to keep him awake, like I could name Rod Marsh in that category. He didn't need the rest of the team putting the cigarettes between the fingers and then lighting them up so as when they burnt down, Bernie would wake up and reach for another can off the slab and drink it down. Because his was all unassisted.
Yes.
And that's what people forget, as you'd say, is people forget that he went on the plane knowing that the record was there for his taking and realising that in future years people would be able to get all sorts of help, all sorts of, from the chemist, from the pharmacological side of it, and to teammate side of it, you'd have people like Merv inventing things to keep you awake and so on. And so I consider his is the real record, unlike many others who see the baton of cans across to England, passing from Doug to Rod and then on to Booney.
I have to agree with you absolutely wholeheartedly, HG. He ordered every one of those cans himself.
Paid for it?
He paid for it himself. There was no one...
cheering him on?
No, Stacky was sitting beside him, I think.
Holding the bucket.
That's right. I remember once Stacky said to Doug, do you want me to get you another one, Doug? Doug stood up and punched him because he said, listen, Stackpole, I don't need you butting in on my record. This is mine alone. And I was sitting opposite there. It meant a lot to me. I'll remember that image forever. And Stacky, of course, was very embarrassed and apologised and tried to make up with Doug for the rest of the tour. Of course, he never did. Doug never spoke to Keith Stackpole after that because he was a funny bloke, Doug. If you got him on side, you couldn't meet a nicer bloke. But cross him once and you'll cross off forever. Keith Stackpole, I think, regrets to this day that he ever tried to help Doug.
Now, when you come to the modern so-called exponents of the craft, you see Booney going on the plane with every possible help in getting this record. Teammates cheering him on. He had a bit of a cheer squad 4 rows down, just turning around and spelling out the letters B-O-O-N and, striking up a chant.
Keeping score too.
That's right. Holding up the big numbers
right.
when he got to the 10.
Doug kept his own score.
That's right. That's right. Now, the funny thing is that I'm certain that the records of this are yet to be, really revealed.
Yeah.
Because I think that the missing scorebook of that tour to England that Doug Walters went on and broke the record, have been stolen. And I think that probably a member of the Boone family might have been responsible for it.
Yes, I know Stumpy, when he knew it was 49 he was aiming for, he said it to me as he got onto the tarmac there with a wink in his eye. I think Booney knows more than anyone else knows about the caper. I think Doug's record, Doug, when he was absolutely nearly comatose, semi-oblivious there towards when I was just arriving at Gatwick, I think he may have overlooked, maybe 4 or 5 cans that he hadn't taken. He just forgot to, put the cross down to register where he was registering on the windowsill there, scratching it in with a penknife. I think he may have overlooked 1 or 2, and so historians who've taken the photographs of the windowsill subsequent say there are a couple of scratches there that they can't quite identify. They don't know. They're sort of like looking at the Rosetta Stone or something. There's a few bits missing and just a couple of scratches only going in one direction, and it's only the fully crossed ones that they've accepted as bona fide genuine ones. But if you look at just the singles beside the X's, I think Doug would have done about 65.
Hello, Australia. Sir Richard here again. My house in Auckland was voted by Jim Schwartzman as the finest in the world. I put it down to the paint, from the Edgbaston old cream windowsills to the bull-eye loam brown guttering and the Reader long-off red poking out from under the eaves, all courtesy of Angus Fraser Paints. Home decorators, when you draw with Angus Fraser Paints, you win.
Players, don't give the game away just because you can't play. Don't pull up the stumps on your career because you're dead set ordinary. Stay in the caper, become an administrator. Have the team travel where you want to go for a change. Have the B-grade final in your suburb. Have the youngsters calling you mister. Phone up test players and you can call them by their first name. Sign the Australia-England test scorebook and much, much more. Look, as Laurie Saul says, in administration there is life after death.
Well, Roy, it's been just marvellous over the months that we've taken to make this tape, just locking horns with you about some of the big issues in sport and in particular cricket. I think we should leave, though, the audience listening to this as they are in their cars and in their lounge rooms or wherever they may be gathered with a ray of hope. And I can't think of any better way than asking you your thoughts on the simple question of what cricket means to me.
It's a very hard question, HG, but one I'm very happy to answer. It's a lot of things. Mainly it's memories and it's statistics. It's getting up early on a Saturday morning and the first thing you do is leap out onto the cold lino and have a look through your window to see if it's a blue sky. And if it is, you know the game's on. It's fossicking around and putting on your socks first, your white socks, and then your creams with the stain having been removed from the gusset by Mum during the week. It's then putting on your white shirt and your baggy cap. It's finding your bat that you've left standing upside down out in the backyard with the linseed oil having been poured down the top of it. It's grabbing your bat and your new cherry if you've got one, or an old one you might have found down by the creek. And it's running down knowing you're going to spend the best part of a whole day with 10 other mates and 11 blokes whose guts you hate. It's standing around in the dressing rooms, listening to the talk. It's listening to the spikes on the concrete in the spare and Spartan room. It's hearing the rattle of the picket and the captain the skipper turning you and saying, "Roy, you're on, first drop." And it's going out, swishing the bat around, getting the eyes adjusted because you've been indoors and it's very bright outside. It's getting out into the middle. It's saying, "Umpy, give me centre and off." It's having a look around the field and taking your time and seeing how many people are in slips. It's having had a word to the bloke who's just been out and said to him on your way in, what are they doing anything? Knowing it doesn't give a bugger what his answer's going to be. If he says yes, you don't care. If he says no, you don't care. You get out there, you look at the first ball coming towards you, you make sure you don't look at anything else but the bloke's hand. You see the way the ball comes, you follow it, you watch what it's doing, you let it go. You do that time and time again until you know it's your turn either to have a stab or get out. That's what cricket is to me, and at the end of the day, everyone's happy. It doesn't matter who's won or who's lost because nobody cares. Nobody cares about scores. Nobody cares about anything. It's just the fact that 11 or 22 rowdy blokes who, if they weren't doing that, might be stealing car hubcaps or smashing in windows to shop fronts or creating disturbances or unsettling nature or blowing up tadpoles or kicking down telegraph poles or getting involved and bashing up other people. It's knowing that those 22 blokes haven't done that. What have they done? They've organised themselves. They've got together. They've trod that very fairy tale fine ground between love and hate, between romance and loathing, between death and life. They're filled in another day that at night they can kick up their heels knowing that day hasn't been a dud, it hasn't been a blank, something's been advanced, some cause that's greater than everything, the cause of cricket.
I couldn't top that for an answer, Roy, and I just let that pause sit there for a moment or two so the audience could listen. And I would add, the only other thing that I would say about that is whenever I see a test match underway, I realise that the 22 players and a couple of umpires have decided the world isn't going to end in the next 5 days. And I think there's something that even in this hurly-burly, this heart attack-inducing pace that we live our life that we can take comfort from. And, of course, they're the people you meet. And, of course, I met you.
Great mates.
Yes, lifelong mates.
Keith Miller.
Indeed, yes, Roddy Hogg, of course, Bishan Beatty, as we've talked about through this tape.
Simo, Arthur Morris, the names just reel off, even if you've never known them.
You feel as
you feel as if you've known them.
And when you walk into the bank, you can put them down on referees when you open an account.
That's right.
Stuff like that. Or when you want to rent a car, maybe you'll be in that fortunate position one day.
Yeah.
They ask a couple of people who might know you, or then, H.G. Nelson. I always put Simo down and Bishan Beatty. And, of course, the rent-a-car firm ring them up and say, do you know somebody called H.G. Nelson? And surprise, surprise, Simo and Bish say yes. And that's the sort of thing that can happen with cricket. And I think, Roy, that not enough is made of that. And we've met probably everybody who's ever played cricket in Australia and have found them all marvellous people. If you were stuck on the highway late one night with the dogs howling and the moon hidden and it was rain pissing down, sorry I used that, I didn't mean that, but it's the best way I can describe it, falling down in buckets is probably a better way of describing it. And Gary Gilmore came by, he'd be the first one out with the jack to help you with your flat tyre. That's what cricket's about, Roy.
Absolutely, HG.
You can only agree with everything that HG and Roy have said about the game, and even though I'd never played the caper at the level they achieved, I can appreciate that the higher you play the game, the more it means to you. As stumps are drawn at the end of a magnificent day's play, which saw the Australians win back the Ashes, we take you back to All Studios. This is Jim Maxwell, signing off from the Wicket to Wicket central commentary position. Bye now.